When I talk about making games, something that comes up is that an awareness of more games makes you better at making your own games. When you understand ways people have tried to do things, you get more ideas for ways you want to do things. And sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel. This often means trying to get people's attention onto outliers, oddballs, things that they wouldn't have considered even trying to do. Whether that's journaling RPGs or minimalist one-page storytelling games, or trying to make super complicated mods for dense, crunchy rule systems that normally resist them. It is, in my opinion, a hallmark of good design literacy for you to be able to look to a variety of different games and not be surprised by seeing things that don't necessarily fit with the existing dominant paradigm of design. I bring this up because I want to talk to you about Golden Sky Stories, a pastoral tabletop role-playing game by Ryo Kamiya and Sugihagi Honpo. In Japanese media, there is a term you might have heard of, Iyashikei, which is roughly translated as healing. It's a type of media, usually anime or manga, created to not necessarily give you high drama or tension, but just something comforting and restful and soothing. There have been a number of very popular shows recently that function this way, and it can sometimes be jarring, especially coming from a Western perspective, to watch a show like this and maybe have the reaction of, but nothing happened, or what's the point? Not quite grasping that the point of this media is often to transport you away from your existing situation and enjoy the feeling of the experience for a while. It's a vibe. So Golden Sky Stories is an Iyashikei game. Don't think of Dungeons and Dragons, think My Neighbor Totoro. Don't think Fallout, think Yokohama Kaideshi Kaiko. The whole point of this game is to let you play out stories that are nice. There is a body of the audience that immediately shut off. A big part of how you set a tone in a game is in its interface. Things with big, chunky buttons evoke a different feel to things with slick, smooth touchpads. This carries on for tabletop RPGs as well. Busy, detailed character sheets can inspire a feeling of wanting to fill things in, and large, open, blank spaces can make people feel creatively inspired. It is a challenge to design the game such that the game makes you play the game the way the game wants to be played. Golden Sky Stories' interface for a player, then, is the type of character you can make, which is a henge, a little nature spirit, often depicted as a kid, which is a transformed animal from the neighboring environment that is integrating itself a little bit with the human society to try and make things better for people. In a lot of ways, it's a what if the Care Bears was written by someone interesting kind of storytelling space. The book, Golden Sky Stories, is written very deliberately in English, translated to try and convey a specific tone from the Japanese authors. It is very careful about explaining the ideas of role-playing games and the concepts behind them in a way that doesn't frame things as conflict or violence. This game is constantly talking to you about people's feelings, about your connections to them, and about the world that you live in as a place. If you want me to just dig into this as if it were a typical RPG and talk about the mechanics as systems for creating the kinds of stories it wants, it's really good. The overall softness and tweeness of the storytelling, and the fact that the system doesn't want to be very precise and detailed about conflict points, doesn't mean the system is not doing a lot with its interface to make sure that you think of the game in the way the game wants to be experienced. Particularly because this is a game about being friendly and kind and helping people, the game's underlying system works to reward you for building connections with other people. You have resources for using your special powers and overcoming challenges, for effectively replacing dice rolls, that come from how many people you care about and how deeply, and how many people care about you and how deeply. You can be someone who cares a lot about a small number of people, cares a little about a lot of people, or indeed builds over time very strong connections with large groups of people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to feel the same way about you back. And these connections are part of the system that you want to interface with to do things. So, the game encourages you to always be thinking in terms of, how can I deepen my relationships with other people, even if just because your only incentive system is getting better at that so you have more points to spend when you want to try and do difficult things. This system also relies on a sort of experience system known as Dream, which may be familiar to people who've been playing a lot of the more recent indie games, where if other people see you do something cool, they may reward you with Dream. But they want to reward you with Dream, but they can't just give it to you freely. They have to have a reason why they are giving you Dream, which means that players are actively looking at other people's behavior and the storyteller's behavior and going, that was a good moment, I would like to reward you for that. Giving out Dream doesn't cost you anything. So it is an entire game system that wants you to think in terms of your relationships to characters and NPCs, and wants you to think in terms of your relationship to yourself. It wants you to think about what other people are doing so that you can reward them with Dream, and it wants you to care about the world and the place you are in it so that you can make narrative moments that reward you with Dream. It's an entire game system where the fundamental mechanism is giving. To give Dream does not diminish you. It is not a precious resource to be spent, but rather a joy to be shared. There are a lot of details in this that I like a lot. Particularly, there's an extensive table about different ways you can be someone's friend, different kinds of connections you can have, and how those connections can be asymmetric. It is entirely possible to like someone who is merely protecting you. It is entirely possible that you may trust someone, but they don't trust you in the same way, but they are fond of you. This depth of language around the simple act of enjoying people's company or being connected to them is another one of those ways that the system builds on itself. Because you can ask yourself, do I feel more trust or do I feel more protection? And in so doing, you are concentrating on and considering the way that the story you are telling is being told. Towards the end of the book, there is a section on developing your own town. While the default setting is a ridiculously pastoral, nice little Japanese town, it notes that that may be alien to you. It may not be a thing you experience, and therefore wants you to think in terms of what a small, isolated town would be like for you as a place that people can live happy lives, which is often a recontextualizing. As an Australian, when I think of remote locations, I often think of despair and isolation as being sad, as if anyone who lives in those remote locations must be unhappy. Just because I like living where I live, which, admittedly, I can walk 5 minutes to a horse paddock, so it's not like I'm particularly in the middle of a dense area. The world of Golden Sky Stories is not a place where you need problems, where you're going to call for ambulances and the police. It's not a world where cops don't exist. It's rather that whether or not cops exist is irrelevant. If cops would become part of your story, you probably shouldn't be using this story to talk about it. This is a game for helping people make friends at school, about finding ways to deal with losing something, about helping people recover from injuries. If I was going to give you one reason why you, as a disinterested game designer or tabletop RPG enthusiast, should check out Golden Sky Stories, even if you're never going to play it, it should be that you could embrace the absolute dedication this game has to using its game language to recognize the ways it wants you to think of the world. I am genuinely impressed with the work of this translator as well, because this language is obviously its second language. Someone has taken great effort to use the sometimes nuanced differences between English terminology and Japanese terminology for even things like seasons and affection. It is a really impressively done work. I think the place where I'm most struck by the challenge of translation, though, is in the foreword, which is unlike anything I've read in a tabletop RPG sourcebook before. To you who are looking at this book, thank you. To you who bought this book, thank you. This is a role-playing game rulebook. Role-playing game. RPG. It's a game where you play the role of another person, another you, in another place, another world. That means that in order to enjoy this book, you need to create a place to serve as a stage, and this other you, your other self and his or her friends will come together to talk, laugh, have fun, and occasionally feel sad or cry too, as you cut loose and experience life. Your other self will have all kinds of different experiences. Although these experiences will be indirect, you will likely still be able to feel them. You control your other self. When he or she makes a decision, you decide through him or her at the same time. When he or she meets someone, you meet them through him or her. When he or she talks to someone, you talk to them through him or her. Your other self can also do things that you can't. But on the other hand, she might not be able to do some of the things you can do. You can't do everything, and neither can your other self. The things that you can and can't do are part of what makes life enjoyable. Enjoy being someone different from yourself. Get a taste of a different way of life. That's the purpose of this book. Now, there's another important thing. You don't enjoy these stories by yourself. You need to gather friends around you so they can create their own other selves, who can in turn become friends with yours. The world is not for one person alone. The stories that come from this game are by and for everyone. You might think that there are a lot of things that seem tedious. It might seem a burden even just to read this book. Preparing stories might seem troublesome. Your first try might turn out how you'd like, leaving a bad taste in your mouth. Still, the stories you create with your friends will surely be more wonderful than those made by others. There are some stories in this book, but please blow past them to spin the stories that are shining inside of you. Everyone has the power to create stories of their own. The games called RPGs are meant to draw as much of that out of people as possible. May your story sustain you. May it add flowers to the story of your life. That is what this humble author prays for. This introduction has gone on a little too long, it seems. Please turn the page, and we can begin. Would that I could ever teach the courage in being so openly and purely honest about the want to bring joy.